Hello and welcome to the Medic Side Hustles podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shubhendu Kulshreshtha, an executive coach and an emergency physician helping clinicians like you make medicine your side hustle. Today, my guest is Dr. Ross McKean, a GP, educator, author, and the founder of Medizom, a platform helping doctors reconnect with their careers before burnout takes hold. Ross has zigzagged through multiple specialties, mentored hundreds of trainees, and built impactful educational programs. But the real story is what he learned when medicine nearly broke him. Today, we'll dive a little bit into that, but also into how he built and launched Medizom. In the second half, I'll hand over the hosting to Ross to ask me whatever he'd like about coaching non-clinical careers or me in general. Thanks for joining me today, Ross. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, lovely to have you. I think we've been kind of chatting in the comments. We met on Rachel's LinkedIn Live.
Yes.
And I think conversations have been going. Thank you for hosting me on your platform as well.
Yeah, very welcome. Yes.
Yeah. So I think just to start us off, give our listeners a brief overview of your career and what you do now.
Okay, yeah. So I've been a GP just for over a year, but it's been quite a zigzag path, as you mentioned, to this point. So I graduated in 2013, did my F1, F2, and then didn't have any real idea of where I was going to go beyond that. Sort of felt spat out the end of that conveyor belt without much guidance or not much thought process on my part as to where I really wanted to head with my career. So I ended up going for a clinical teaching fellowship job because I'd done some presenting for a finals course. I really enjoyed that, but again, at the end of the year, was twiddling my thumbs, wondering where to go next. So went to core medical training. Initially really enjoyed that, but halfway through, really struggled with my first experience of quite bad burnout, dragging myself to work, had a really difficult experience over Christmas night shifts, culminating in the end of that year having a discussion for my portfolio where my educational supervisor was questioning why I hadn't had any engagement with the portfolio for a couple of months, even though I seemed really kind of smiley and productive on the outside. I said, I'm just not enjoying this work anymore. And he reasoned, well, we'll get you back on track for year 2. And I'm just thinking, no, he's not listening to me here. Ultimately, 2 weeks later, I did a shift with a locum registrar who said, why don't you just resign? And it was a huge weight off my shoulders. It was the first time that had ever been considered a possibility for me. And so the first time I really felt like I was wrestling back control to do things on my terms. And I absolutely loved locuming because it finally gave me the chance to feel like a good doctor, to feel like I was serving patients well. So built up myself again. That was the time that I then met my now wife, who's been a huge support and has got me through training beyond that. So I did some medical registrar work in New Zealand for just under a year, then came back to consider what would I do properly. I can't locum forever, can I? So ultimately decided on GP training. So we moved down to Cambridge in 2020, the GP training, and enjoyed it ever since, really. So yeah.
That's really interesting. Wow, yeah, lots of things in there. I want to dive into that moment when this registrar kind of allowed you to think about resigning from where you were. At this point, did you have that insight that you were going through burnout, that you were?
Not really. I guess because this was 2016. I guess burnout wasn't really spoken about in the same way it was now, and I was just really, my mental capacity could only really deal with getting through each day without thinking about what, stepping back and actually thinking what it's doing to me. And it's just that age-old mentality, isn't it, of I'll be happy when I was always thinking about I just need to get through this year and then things will get better. But kicking the can down the road, I was just learning worse and worse habits of coping. So it was a kind of, no one at any point said you are burning out, including the locum registrar. He was just very much like, oh, it just makes sense for you to think about that, doesn't it?
Interesting.
So.
Wow. And that sounds like a very interesting perspective, especially even today. I think we're surrounded by people knowing about burnout, but I think the recognition is so hard. And even when it's recognized, offering something to do about that is another challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I guess looking back, what were some of the things that you may have noticed for yourself, and what would you recommend to yourself now, I guess, if you were looking back?
Yeah, so I guess it was withdrawing from just things that would normally bring me joy. I was ending up essentially becoming what now I term a medic zombie. So I was disconnecting from feeling the pain, but then from doing that I also disconnected from potentially allowing joy and meaning into my life. So I was very apathetic about things. My coping mechanisms were on a spectrum fairly benign in that it usually ended up me being on YouTube watching rubbish for hours on end on days off, sometimes not really doing much with my day, then feeling that feeling of extreme guilt for usually being a perfectionist and a overachiever, just that didn't align with those values. So the guilt on top of that really compounded that problem. And I just felt in a huge funk state. When you blearily have doom scrolled for so many hours and then get away from your phone and are just walking around in town, you just feel like it's a bit of a dream world.
Yeah.
So I really didn't enjoy feeling in that state.
It's really interesting, and you don't actually have the ability to see yourself from the outside within that state. I remember when I was doing my ITU rotation, I thought I really enjoyed it. I said, okay, I'm doing all of these cool things. These patients really need me. It's a bit emotionally heavy, with about 50% of your patients not surviving. And I was like, okay, this has been like fantastic. I learned some amazing skills. And then, at the end of it, my wife turned to me and she's like, you were an absolute zombie. You just weren't present. You weren't there at home. And I was like, okay, I really got to think about that.
Yes, yeah. And, I speak with my wife about that time now, because I did actually, although I went to the promised land in New Zealand, I did a very difficult job as a neurology registrar, which also burnt me out. And I sort of laugh, but I shouldn't, because, it's like there's still that voice in my head that says, oh, classic millennial snowflake, can't deal with the pressures. But actually the system was really designed for me to fail. And we're sort of recounting conversations I would have over the phone. My wife was in New York at the time, so it was an incredibly long distance relationship. But she was saying, you just didn't seem to engage very well, and I don't remember half the conversations we had because I was just so tired. It's amazing how much you can lose of yourself. But the kind of turnaround for me coming back from New Zealand, and I kind of talk about this on Medizom, is the fact that I was constantly just trying to think my way out of problems. And I realised that sometimes just is the worst thing that you can possibly do. So the brainwave to me came when I started a new job in Inverness doing acute medicine. It was a very busy shift, but I felt much better again, kind of really picked myself up, had better routines, living quite a monastic lifestyle in Inverness. So it was on-site accommodation, had my sup board, so we'd go to the beach on days off and just love feeling like I was home again in Scotland, not far away in New Zealand, and finding the beauty there. I went on a run one evening where I had my headphones on, I was sprinting, setting a good pace, and it was quite a narrow path through woodland. Thought I was expertly avoiding nettles in my path, up until a point where the path narrowed and there was a huge nettle thorn bush ahead of me, and had to grind to a halt and stop. And it was at that point I realised my legs were completely inflamed by nettles that I thought I'd so expertly avoided. And it was a reflection for me on, well, this is exactly how I've pursued my medical career. I've just thought, try to think, do, not think about deviating my path, always thinking about the same pace, head down, distracted, not noticing the nettles, but also not noticing the pretty wildlife on the way. And so actually realizing, yeah, actually at some point you do need to slow down. Sometimes you need to actually take stock, gather your breath, look around, create some space, to not think, to just be, and to recognize what your movement state is before going on ahead. So that was the first kind of kindling of a hard lesson learned that I wanted to share with others.
So counterintuitive, isn't it? I mean, at a moment when you're trying your hardest to keep going and just do something more that will move you forward, the solution is actually to do less.
Yeah.
It's so mind-boggling, and I think so hard to digest when you're in that moment as well. I'm again kind of feeling like going back to that moment when this registrar told you that you could quit, and then you had this moment where like that weight was taken off your shoulder. Was that an immediate thing, or was that something that sunk in after a while? Was that like on the back of a couple of conversations?
It was completely an immediate thing. Yeah, it was. As soon as he'd said it, I knew that was the right thing. It's just something was unlocked in me.
Wow.
That I think my heart was saying it, but it wasn't communicating with my head. So that just felt like the validation that, the guy was a bit of an asshole, really. He drove a sports car, and I didn't really like him ultimately, but I guess he saved me in some ways.
Okay.
So I'm eternally grateful for him, despite his character.
Just a matter of fact, like if you don't like it, just quit.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I like the story about running through the bush as well, because the path does seem to somehow continue to narrow, and it's almost like you walk back on that path and you realize, oh, there were all these other routes that I could have taken. Did you kind of have that experience with your career as well? I mean, it sounds like you came back and went into GP practice and things.
Yeah, and ultimately I don't, it's like a lot of these coaches as well, we all share this similar experience of either low level or complete burnouts, and some of the bigger names in burnout recovery like Rachel Morris and Claire Ashley, and these sorts of people have experienced significant burnouts and have used that as the power and the belief to really make something helpful for people. So yes, I've burnt out twice. Yes, it took me a while to find a job that feels fulfilling and challenges me in the right ways. But it's a shame I had to go through that experience, and it's definitely my message isn't that everyone needs to burn out in order to break through. But certainly you can stop yourself getting to the abyss. I sort of say there's a long road to burnout paved with good distractions. So it's not like you're firing on all cylinders one second and suddenly burnt out the next. And I think we see it in quite a binary way. And I kind of saw it in myself as like not seeing the warning signs and just then being, rolling with nettle stings all over me, completely unable to move without seeing that faltering path towards that state. So, part of Medizom is trying to challenge people in a more imaginative way, in a less overused cliched term of the rhetoric of burnout. Everyone's kind of a bit immune to it now. It doesn't really resonate with people in the same way because it's been so overused. So I'm trying to even breathe life back into the idea of burnout, of it being something that's a spectrum that can make you feel a bit zombified. And the kind of focus for me is not to provoke someone into saying, well, how dare you say I'm a medic zombie, but just to think, oh yeah, I do kind of shuffle through my work. I do sort of head down, just think about getting to the next checkpoint without feeling enlivened. And I do engage in habits that are ultimately not good for my soul and my heart in getting back to work in a compassionate way.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely resonate with the first time I read about the medic zombie climbing up the mountain, and I said, oh my God, there's so many of us trying to get to the top of this mountain, and the only way to get there is to become a zombie. And it's like, oh, geez, like that. This is so true, and just such a nice view of what's actually going on, and
Yeah.
allowing people to just look at where they are right now and saying, hey, do I actually want to be climbing this mountain? Like, is that
Hmm.
what I did all of this for? Like, for me, the question was like, I came all the way from India to the UK, gave up lots and put in years of effort, and where was it taking me? Like, was that the mountain that I chose to climb? It probably wasn't. And I was like, when did I get here?
Mm.
So it's an interesting thing in that I
It's
think.
really interesting because I think we reflexively just think the problem's with us.
Mm,
And a big frustration for me about the burnout apps that are out there or the resources provided by the systems that are inducing the burnout is that very thing. It's actually, okay, there might be habits that we need to look at, but a much larger problem is the system that's inducing it. So the zombigenic system that I call it, that's manufactured from medical school to be used to the gaslighting, to be used to the hierarchy, to encourage your people-pleasing behaviors and your willingness to sacrifice. So that's really what, that sounds quite bleak, but I think in some ways that is what you want that thick skin. They want to induce that thick skin, but unfortunately that thick skin sometimes smothers our humanity.
yeah.
And we need to really hold on to that, especially in our role.
Yeah, and hold on to like what we think we deserve. And unfortunately, I think I remember this experience when we were doing like an away day for the ED team. So it was all the doctors, all the nurses, all the admin staff, and a couple of other allied health professionals as well. And the day started off by having all of us kind of talk about where we came from, where we've lived, and things like that. And I think there was definitely a theme in there, especially amongst the non-clinical staff, often having grown up in the same place, worked in the same department for many, many years, and having what quote-unquote a normal home life, whereas all of the doctors, pretty much 100% of the doctors, had moved around a lot, had difficult upbringing, had loss and grieving and trauma in their childhood. And I could only look at that pattern and think, wow, no wonder we look at ourselves as this burden bearer and this person who wants to go down the hard route. And we make these difficult choices for the intention of doing good,
Mhm.
and yet we put ourselves in situations which nobody would. I mean, I look at myself now and sort of a little bit on the outside. I still work 50%, but every time I go into night shift, I am in charge of somebody coming in with a really, really sick baby, and taking that responsibility to put myself in that situation to help that family and that baby out. If you say that to anybody else, they would run 100 miles from that situation. Why would you do that to yourself, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And yet
Yeah, it's
that's who we are.
acknowledging it's a difficult job and being forgiving to yourself. Yeah,
Yeah.
similarly for me, seeing 30 patients a day and holding 30 patient stories in your head,
Yeah.
trying to get, distill that to say, right, that's it over, and I can focus on me now. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy.
The truth is that we care at the end of the day, and that's really hard to deal with. So I want to get into how. Firstly, I love that we're talking about this because, like a lot of people on my action ship, this is something that's like come out of Medizom, is something that's come out of your story and your journey, and it's very much mission led, and it's out there to make a difference in the world. It is a business, but it's not about making money, as in the priority is to help people and make a difference.
Yeah.
So I want to get into that, and I want to get into your journey of building Medizom and the changes you went through for yourself and how you made it successful. But I think to start off with, just tell us a little bit about what Medizom is. I've put a link in the comments and it'll be in the description as well so people can check out Medizom. But what is it, just in a brief overview?
Yeah. So initially, it was mainly about signposting people to help, signposting people to coaches that had a background in medicine, also sharing inspiring stories for expiring doctors. That was kind of my thing. We have some really wonderful doctors that have shared their experience of maybe not necessarily burnout, but how they've changed their path to allow them to remain human through it all. But yeah, it's been something that's been a passion project that I've mulled over for a long time that's been put on hold to get through training, because it would be ironic if Medizom was a source of further burnout and so on. So in the small pockets of time that I've had over this year, really, I've tried to build it and to really flesh it out, the bare bones, and now just putting some meat on it. So the main values that I use to deliver the products are reflect, protect, and connect. So the idea is we need to start with reflection. If we are resuscitating ourselves and the system, the first point of basic life support is check your environment. Check for signs of danger and for hazards in your environment, lest you become in the same predicament as the person before you check for signs of life. So the onus on reflection to begin with is reflecting on that zombogenic environment. So understanding from the start that you might be in a zombogenic environment. We've got a questionnaire on the website that looks at your work hygiene rating. It's kind of like the food hygiene rating.
Interesting.
So you can see if your workplace is objective. So it's looking at what BMA, for example, says is a safe, effective GP surgery. If you're meeting those terms, if you're getting your breaks, if there's you're encouraged to take your breaks, you can get a score there and then do what then becomes a reflection on yourself. So your level of connection score, you can see if there's a disparity. If your work hygiene rating is low and your level of connection is low, it's pretty much saying you're a medic zombie and you're dealing with a zombogenic system here. Whereas it could be your work hygiene is actually, your surprise, really high, and actually it's more these habits that are more for you to work on. So by a process of reflecting on whether you're in a zombogenic system or slightly a medic zombie yourself and what is the spectrum of that, we can go on to understanding what we need to protect. When I talk about the values of the current system we're protecting the wrong things. We're protecting the status quo, the hierarchy, the gaslighting, the ego. And so I'm saying we need to protect ourselves from the ego and the egoic system. So that brings in communicating and discussing about mindfulness, meditation, finding flow states, but also about calling it out, maybe going to your work and saying, this is my work hygiene rating. I think we need to have a discussion about how we can make this a better place to work. And then connection is about connecting to yourself, but also connecting with others, feel the same way and creating that community. The three main products that I've been developing, the main one has been this allegorical tale about an actual medical mountain, and situated on it is Endless Heights Hospital, and there's a doctor that is trying to escape the Endless Heights Hospital as basically a form of the medic zombie apocalypse takes hold. So I've generated the first 3 chapters of this tale, and I wanted that as a way of not didactically saying to someone, this is what you need to do, these are the factors that could mean you're a medic zombie, and just being quite a passive process, but allowing each chapter to be like a soft world building. You can read into it what you will. You can make your own conclusions from what's being said about developing altitude sickness as you go up that mountain. What does the altitude sickness mean? They're saying that altitude sickness is attitude sickness. You've just got to change your attitude, and through exposure therapy, you'll just learn to cope. And if you don't, that's on you. So it's like a book club. You have the chapter, and then we have a discussion. So I would highlight that all this is at a very small stage with getting it out there, but I want to get into that a little bit, because of course,
what's standing out to me immediately is that often we talk about burnout and then people offer services to help with burnout, whereas what you're doing is not just services to help with burnout, but saying here's a fresh new perspective to look at your work environment, and one of the outcomes of that might be burnout, and if that is the case, then here's more things that can help you through that. So you are targeting burnout, but then you've also got this really nice structured approach, almost a data-driven approach to help people assess where they are right now.
Yeah.
Was that a very intentional thing? Was that something that you kind of learned and realized that that's what's missing?
Yeah, as I said, I think that because the approach usually is one of looking at you rather than the system. That was my message from the start, was saying that you aren't broken,
Yep.
and actually saying that the medical mountain, that as the story unfolds, you realise that actually, if you take away all the systems, the scaffolding that's been put on top of the mountain so you can't enjoy the journey, when the door's closed and it's just you and the patient, I would hope that you still find meaning and purpose, and it can be a beautiful, fulfilling career, but we forget that.
Yeah.
I feel sad that there's been times when I've not recognised that this is a wonderful job. And like you are trying to promote, it is sometimes taking that step back so that maybe you don't interact with that zombogenic system as much, but when you do, you can give it what you feel it deserves and feel empowered by the other tools in your toolkit from your other business or whatever, and from what you've learned from your career coach and so on.
So you said this has obviously been a work for a couple of years over your training life. What were some of the phases you went through and a couple of the learning points you had as you went on that journey, perhaps through market surveys or conversations with some specific people? Take us from like the original idea to how it ended up being where it is now.
Yeah, good question. At the start, there were quite a lot of podcasts that I was involved in, which in some ways, having the challenging questions through people that were in the space already helped me to understand where the pain points were. So that analogy that I shared about the running through the forest, that was kind of the story that I would often share. And I think, to be honest, at the start, the message was too much about my story, and I recognized from talking with people that own the Building a Story brand, I think it's called, that actually I needed to change how I was projecting my message. They use a wonderful kind of framework to alter how many businesses get it wrong, where they put the client as what is it? They say that you need to take your client on a journey from them as the hero, coming up with to see a challenge, but they meet someone on the way who is a guide, and they say, with the guide's help, you avoid X and you come to Y. So I did reframe it to ensure that it made it clear from the start what I knew the pain points for the hero to be, and the challenging environment they were, and rather seeing myself as the guide, not necessarily the one with all the answers, but maybe someone with some of the right questions that you hadn't asked yourself before.
Yeah, a bit of a meta here for our listeners, I guess, in terms of like what storytelling really means for a business and what it means for actually doing something. And I think a lot of it also then feeds into like your credibility, your perception of yourself, and like what you're actually helping people through. And what you just suggested it is the hero's journey. I think is a very typical story structure that people can try and just Google hero's journey, and they can model their own story to that as well. So on this path, so you started off with telling the story about yourself, and then you learned to iterate that story. So you were already capturing the pain points. What were some of the other iterations that then have now resulted in your website being the way it is?
Yeah, I suppose if I look at my Weebly website, I still use Weebly for the website builder. I think there's been probably about 10 iterations of how the websites looked like. So procrastinating being the main thing, I would constantly work up the homepage without actually looking at any of the additional pages. So I think LinkedIn had been helpful in some ways to allow me to get scrappy. So understanding other businesses that were out there with maybe not as much content, not as much cognitive sort of time and effort put into their business, and yet they were just willing to put themselves out there to promote their work. I think it was a bit of work on myself and you know this as well as I do, that we as doctors feel uneasy about providing a service that we're asking potentially money for, and it should just be from the goodness of my heart, and then a bit of imposter syndrome to think, am I really the right person to be telling the story? So I think after reading the Building a Story Brand book, it just changed my desire and how I wanted to share all the resources with that story, with building this Endless Heights story about the mountain and making it more fun, allowing parts of myself that I wish I was able to use more day to day, allowing those things to be used. So my creative energy, my drawing, my animations, video editing. So it's come together really nicely now that I've actually, I think, just seen it less as a hurdle to overcome, but just seeing it day by day, right? Well, I'm enjoying this chapter, writing it, and then And then the other thing was working for, I don't know if you know Dr. Emma Pearson. She's the owner of
fantastic community.
Rebellious Health. I hosted for one of their weeks, their Connect weeks, and went through my 3 chapters with the sort of book club style discussions at the end. And that was really almost the first time I'd showed anyone my little precious baby Medizom and said, don't hurt it, she's just born, and actually to get the feedback that everyone thought it was a really powerful tale, that they recognized, oh gosh, I thought I was better, but there are still parts of me that are disconnecting, and I really need to work on that. That was a real catalyst for saying, right, I've just got to get it out there and get the product. So defining it as a packaged product now has only been in the last week. So it's quite serendipitous that this podcast has been on, to be able to actually say it is a thing now.
Yeah, I think that is such a cool story, and that's a really interesting way to think about it. I think when people are on this journey, when they start to say, oh, this is something I want to do and I want to change, the first thing they start to look at is like, oh, how do I get the experience to actually deliver the solution? Whereas that's not exactly the route you've kind of taken. Could you kind of speak a little bit to the identity shifts that happened for you in terms of like what your role on this journey was, and what were some of the sort of limiting beliefs or hesitancies that came up for you, and how did you change or work through those?
Yeah, I think I definitely have had limiting beliefs. That's what led me to burnout in the first place. We're all generally a little bit people pleaser mentality, so we will sacrifice our own well-being for those of others. And there are hard things to shake off. I suppose for me, seeing firsthand the help of having sort of CBT. So I had that just before going into ED and during the pandemic as my first sort of training post in GP training. Just fun. Exactly. I thought I'm not armed with enough things in my toolkit to feel like I can do this job well and stay afloat. So I had 6 weeks of CBT, felt really armed with much better tools to actually really enjoy the A&E experience. So recognizing, not having the shame of getting that support, just understanding that it's training your mind like you train a muscle at the gym. It got a little bit flabby over COVID and lockdown, but much the same.
Same difference.
So, I need to get my thought processes back into shape. So that was one way of expanding what was limiting beliefs, and understanding wasn't the fault of anyone, it's just life. It's not the fault of my parents because their upbringing was how they act, etc. And that was quite a liberating experience. And then also listening to Tom Dillon's podcast about coaching. So I've not actually done any formal coaching, but to really understand what career coaching was and its ability to be a container for people's thoughts and feelings and all that. That actually there is some well recognized frameworks that allow people to be pointed in better directions. Because because although I'd signposted from an early point about career coaches on my website, I still didn't really know what a career coach did. I thought it was much more right, well, you should do this, don't do that, work out a timetable,
Yeah.
being told what to do, whereas a good career coach should disarm the client to actually say, oh yeah, there are these things that I can do, and they've come out of my own head, my own solutions, and really empowering you. So yeah, that was another way, actually, just listening to a number of those podcasts just helped me also challenge again some of my limiting beliefs, also about my own relationship with my business. And yeah, I'm still learning that. I still don't think I'm very good at promoting myself. I get a little bit tired of playing the sort of the LinkedIn game. And I think I recognize, and I think this is why I've sought help from people in LinkedIn, to see it as another string to your bow to promote your website. And I just hope I can do that in a way that is not, I am the hero, this is my hero story, everyone listen to my story. But actually, I can be a guide, you're the hero, and seeing it that way. So I'm hoping I can take my business to the next level with that in mind.
I think you're spot on. I think this is the future of like the way businesses run, and the more and more we kind of enter into this world of AI and like perfectionism, the more and more people just want authentic human connection. And I think I tried to do that as well. I think very early on in this journey there was a lot of wanting to kind of be perfect and like, how are people going to perceive me? But I just leaned heavy into, these are my imperfections, and this is what I do wrong, and this is what I don't like. And that just gave me the confidence to keep going with that. And I think one of the first podcasts I did was with me in a hoodie, and people were like, oh, is that how we're showing up on LinkedIn now? And I was like, well, that's how I'm showing up, so deal with it. So it's I think it goes a long way to just be yourself. And we in my actionship cohort as well, we kind of talk about this, the fact that the reason you're doing this is to build something of your own, and so make it your own. What are your own sort of constraints and limitations that you want to introduce? And the truth is, you don't need 1 million followers, you don't need everybody to love you, but you just need to be able to find the people who need you, and just get in front of them.
Absolutely. And I think it's exactly that, and seeing, it doesn't have to be a thing about ego. In fact, it's more ego talk if you're saying, well, I don't want to share my product because, I'm scared it's going to be, someone's going to criticize it. But actually, if you really believe in your product, you're just the medium with which you're letting people find it, and it's almost selfish to deny people the value of your product if you don't do that.
Yeah, I talk about like, what's the number needed to treat for your product? Like, how many people
like that.
do you need to put it through that don't find it valuable or don't like it or say something bad about it for even one person to benefit? And it's like, okay, cool. That, like, I don't care if it's 1,000. I don't care if it's 100,000. Like, even if one person benefits, it's just like, wow, completely shifted my perspective.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Yeah, that's I need to remember that.
No, amazing. Thanks so much for sharing this journey and for letting me ask you these hard questions about like what happened then and where did this idea come from and all of those things. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure it's been a fantastically valuable conversation for our listeners. I know a lot of people will watch this back on LinkedIn, but then people can also find us on Spotify and YouTube. I think with that, I just want to hand over the mic to you to ask me 1 or 2 questions if you'd like, Ross.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great to have the conversation and have some quite challenging questions. So I hope I made sense during my responses.
100%.
It was all off script. I didn't have anything.
I love it. That's the beauty of this podcast. It's live. It's off script.
Yeah.
People get the raw deal. Yeah.
Yes. I guess my questions for you are about when you felt like a medic zombie, and how did you get back on track? Was that through career coach? Was that just through you digging deep, or through your wife's support, or all above?
Yeah, probably all of the above is the answer. I think don't ever think that I was burnt out, though as you alluded to, there's a spectrum to it, and I think I was somewhere on the spectrum, probably through COVID, and I remember this moment in 2020 in between the lockdown, I think there was all of these free like mental health first aid kind of like courses and webinars and things, and I was like, okay, maybe I should attend one of them. And they were talking about like, oh, here are all the things that can stress you out. And they're like, oh, having a new baby, getting married, moving houses, changing jobs, and there were like 4 or 5 others. And they were like, who's got one of them? Who's got 2 of them? Who's got 3 of them? I'm like, I've got all of them. That was the year I was starting training. I was changing jobs. I moved cities, and like I wasn't having a baby, but like lots was going on. And I was working in ENT of all things during COVID. So it was a lot going on. And I think I just kind of pushed through that, and I was like, I'm gonna get into training, and then life just kept moving on. There was just so much constant change that there was never this ability to compare to what was happening before and what's happening now. Because if you've lived in the same place, if your environment's been the same, you're like, oh, I wasn't like this before, I'm like this now. I didn't have that kind of baseline.
Mm.
And I guess somewhere along the way, I started to feel like, I think it was sort of ST2, ST3-ish, where you're like, oh, just another 3 years and I'll be a consultant. Like, I'm halfway there. That was the moment when I said, well, maybe, like, I want more control. Like, I know that I can tailor my career to me. I've kind of always had that belief, and that's partly why I said I want to do emergency medicine, and I want to do it in the UK, so I'm going to get here and I'm going to make that happen. And I was just like, oh, that's how I see it happening, so I'm going to do it. And I had that same perspective of becoming a consultant as well. So I went to the PSWS, the Professional Support Wellbeing, and I said, can I have a coach, please, to try and help me through this? They triaged me, and then after the triage call, they said, you don't really need a coach, just speak to your supervisor. And my supervisor said, well, here's all your options. You can do like pre-hospital, you can do pediatric, you can dual CCT and ICU. And I was like, and none of them really excite me. And I said, whatever, I'm so done with this. Like, I'm done with my time in medicine. I've given what I had to give. I can't deal with this system anymore. Like, it's idealistic, but it's not nearly where it should be. And I said, okay, I'm going to leave and go to management consulting because, okay, they're making a bigger impact. The pay is better. It's fancier. It's nicer. And I had a lot of friends in big consulting companies that I spoke to, and they were all just like, don't do it, Shub. It's not worth it. Nobody stays for long enough. But I was like, no, I'm going to do it. So I got myself an interview, which thankfully got pushed by 6 months. Otherwise, I'd be in. Yeah, so they got pushed by 6 months. I was like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm not going to go back to 100% EM all the time. So that's when I first took some time down to 50% clinical, and the other 50% was a quality improvement role. And there's just something magical that happens about taking time. And I was just like, for the first time, feeling rested and started to see actually what were those nettle injuries on my legs and why couldn't I walk. I didn't even realize. And I was kind of like, my intention wasn't to look at myself, but I was forced by choosing that 50% role, I was finally able to see it. And that's when I was like, no way am I going back to 100% ever. This is like my one opportunity to actually take control of my career. And so I went back to PSWS and I said, please give me another coach. This is what I want to figure out. And I'd been listening to loads of podcasts, Paul McKenna's Positivity podcast, and a couple on management consulting because I was planning to do the interviews. And almost serendipitously, all of them, I started to come across executive coaches a lot, especially on the management consulting one. It turned out that a lot of management consultants go on to become coaches or go on to use coaches to help them perform better as leaders and executives. And I was like, whoa, this is all about like leading change, making change happen. That's why I was interested in the Quality Improvement Fellowship. What is this? Who is this person that does this and helps people do this? Whilst at the same time, the Quality Improvement Fellowship I was doing was also focused around quality coaching. So my role wasn't just to do my own projects. It was actually to help other people do their projects in a way that was really sustainable. And I was like, wow, this hits all the boxes. And I said, okay, I'll go down that route. Let me do that and really tailor my career into something that I want. So it's been about nearly 2.5 years since then. It's been a long journey, but figuring out what truly drives me. How do I actually make a difference in things that I care about? And then the biggest one for me was really like, I wanted my work to speak for me even beyond me being there. Like, I was sick and tired of doing all of these QI projects, that the moment I left or changed department, it all just kind of fizzled out and died. And then somebody would come back to me 2 years later and be like, do you know what we're working on? We're working on this. I'm like, I worked on that 3 years ago.
Yeah, constantly reinventing the wheel, isn't
Yeah,
it? Like,
yeah, it just got to
yeah.
me. But yeah, long-winded answer to your questions.
No, that's great. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
it's just that stepping back is the hardest bit, but
Yeah.
it's a bit like Maslow's hierarchy, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, the self-actualization you kind of work towards after building that foundation, and the busy systems like A&E can mean that you have to sacrifice good sleep, good rest, being out in nature, and all those things, and then those shaky foundations just.
100%. And I'm going to speak to a couple of IMGs, because when you come from a different system into a system like the NHS, like, one of the first things that happens is that you get the opportunity to finally move out of meeting your needs. Like, you can finally rest. There are working hours in place, and there's the step up that happens. And it's a really shaky period for a lot of doctors, even really well-established doctors that haven't been able to do that for themselves. They suddenly realize, like, wait, what am I actually here for? And there's like this sudden moment of realization. But then you're right, like Maslow's hierarchy, you do keep going up and up and up, and make sure you complete those bottom few ladders so that you can reach towards self-actualization, realize what you're here for and what you're actually capable of. Because I speak to clinicians, and early on in my market surveys, and when I was trying to like get to what do people actually want, one of the things that kept coming up was that I don't want to make a lot of money, I don't want to be rich and famous, but I want to die knowing that I've done my best and fulfilled my potential. And that was just such a common theme. And I said, like, wow, that really hits home to me as well. Like, I don't want to be rich and famous, but I want to make a difference and do the best I can. And it's like, okay, how do you start doing that? How do you actually reach that point of self-actualization to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's where we are. Thank you for those questions, lovely. So yeah, our next podcast live is actually tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. with Michelle Frank. We're going to be talking about building femtech communities. So all my femtech enthusiasts, please join me tomorrow. If you're listening to this on record on Spotify or YouTube, it'll probably come out a week after this episode's come out. Yeah. Any last sort of call to action from you, Ross, to our audience?
Yeah, just make sure that you're in a system that allows you to be human, and if you're curious to know whether maybe you've got aspects of yourself that are like a medic zombie, hit up medizom.com. If you become a member, which is free, you just need your email address. We can send you to the page where you can do your work hygiene rating, your level of connection questionnaire, all for free. It's quite insightful. It could help you understand where you need to go to next.
Amazing. I think that's perfect. A very special thank you also to Dr. Akash Vijayan for producing this beautiful intro music, especially for this podcast. I hope the conversation sparked some big ideas for everyone listening today and inspired you to think bigger about your career, and also to think about where you are in that career from an outside perspective. Make sure you're not burnt out, and know that there's resources out there to help. Until next time, stay curious, keep solving big problems, and remember, you've got the power to create something extraordinary. Cheers.